Today I want to talk about betrayal trauma. It's a real thing. Hang on. You know, the word betrayed is sort of tossed around sometimes very indiscriminately, and people don't really take it seriously sometimes. They'll say, oh, I was betrayed. He didn't give me back the $5 that he owed me. Well, there's those lighter kind of betrayals like that, but then there's betrayals which really go deep and affect us our whole life sometimes. It can cause trauma, and it can be very complex. So the first thing people think of when they think of betrayal is usually their partner, their significant other, their husband, their wife cheating on them. And yes, that's a huge one that can destroy a relationship for sure, but there's many other kinds as well. I know for me, going to Catholic school for 12 years growing up, I know in grade school when I was raised by the nuns in the full habits and the pointers and all that who would come by and rap you when you did something wrong. As I got older, I felt betrayed by them. How dare they raise school kids in this way? How dare they instill such a fear in kids who are just there to learn, who are very young, but they're fearful of these big nuns. And I grew up and I felt some betrayal about that. You could be betrayed by a coworker. Maybe they're going behind your back and talking to the boss. You could be betrayed by friends who gossip about you. You could be betrayed by a mother and father who raised you as their own child, only to find out when you're 19 years old that your biological mother is actually the sister of your mom, your aunt, and you never knew that, and you feel betrayed. So we find out these lies, and it causes trauma because it so shakes the foundation of how we've lived our life, of what we've wanted to believe. Sometimes people begin to feel real emotionally paralyzed in their life, and they don't quite know what next step to take. So the first thing to do is accept it as a loss and grieve it. Maybe your best friend is no longer your best friend because they betrayed you, and it feels like a death, even though it's not really an actual death, but it feels like a death. And so there's an enormous loss there, and you need to allow yourself to feel the grief and go through the stages of grief. Some people want to minimize this or act like it's no big deal, but if you don't heal from it, it can affect you your whole life. Another important tip is to forgive yourself, because especially if it's from a significant other, and let's say they've cheated on you in the past, and you're thinking, why did I stay with them? Oh my God, I knew better than that. And that's a reasonable thing to think of after the relationship is over. Like, why was I there? But you have to pat yourself on the back and forgive yourself because you were probably doing the best that you could at the time. You were functioning at whatever your emotional IQ was at that time, and maybe you hadn't done any therapeutic work on yourself or realized your feelings in a deep way, so you let people, for example, maybe emotionally abuse you or physically abuse you. Well, once you do the work and you realize that some of that started from when you were a kid, maybe you were physically abused as a child, so you began to think that this was normal, it was very familiar, so then you let your boyfriend or girlfriend abuse you. That's operating from your emotional IQ at that time. Now, hopefully you've done some work and you realize you've made progress in understanding yourself more deeply, and you won't ever let something like that happen again, but you have to forgive yourself for where you were at that time in your life. Try to remind yourself that underneath the layers of the anger and the tears and maybe volcanic responses sometimes, it all comes down to really a very vulnerable issue of trust. That's kind of the soft underbelly we all have that we really want to protect. You know, we don't want our trust to be broken. And betrayal is about our trust being broken on some level. When you get to that soft core, that's when real healing can begin. And know that you may have some symptoms that go on if you haven't had therapy for sometimes quite a few years. It could have to do with your impulses, maybe your attention span, maybe because you're so upset but you haven't dealt with it, you're having somatic symptoms, so physical pains or an upset stomach, which all ties into the betrayal you went through, the trauma that's left after it. And also look for the subtleties of betrayal. Everybody's different. Everybody's impacted and affected different ways by different levels of betrayal. So sometimes people think about the grand things, like somebody sneaking behind their back and talking to the boss, or their spouse cheating on them. But it could also be about something that's considered a little less minor, which is simply not standing up for somebody, not having their back. If you're married or you're in a significant relationship of some kind and you bring your significant other over to meet your mom and dad or some family members and they start picking on him or her or being somehow rude to them, it's your job, your responsibility to stand up for your loved one, not let them get trounced by your family members. You have to be the one who's strong enough to have their back. That's who you want to spend the rest of your life with, right? So they come first. So if you're wondering when you leave an event like that and your significant other is very upset with you, maybe even crying, and you're thinking, what did I do wrong? Well, in this case, it could be because you didn't stand up for them. So that's a betrayal right there. Also in relationships is using something vulnerable to your significant other, something that they've shared with you that's very intimate to them, something that they've trusted you with this particular nugget of information, and then later in an argument or in front of people, you use that information against them to humiliate them as a way to get back at them about something else. Talk about a betrayal, that's a huge one right there, and that's going to probably cause major problems in the relationship. Also along that same line is taking your significant other for granted, or taking good friends for granted, or family members that you really love deeply, you're taking them for granted. They're not dumb, they can feel or sense that they're being taken for granted. They may not be saying it, but it's up to you to change your behavior. You need to tell them that you love them. You need to ask them what you can do to help. When people begin to feel unappreciated, there's going to be some resentment that's going to build up over time. Simple things like saying please and thank you. I love you, come here, give me a hug. These are important things that need to happen on a daily basis to maintain a healthy relationship. And lastly, I just want to say, if you're going through betrayal trauma, make sure you get some therapeutic help. Go to a therapist, talk it out, get some input from the therapist, and especially if you're having trouble sleeping, having nausea, having a hard time concentrating, feeling sad, but you can't quite pinpoint why exactly, this could be as a result of the betrayal trauma that you have been through. So I hope this video has been helpful for any of you who have gone through this. Most of us have been betrayed at some point in our life. The important thing also is to learn from it, understand yourself, understand what happened so that you don't do it with somebody else and betray somebody in your life. Please leave me some comments below. I'd love to hear any input you may have. Please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.